Hello, everyone. I am streaming live from Waterloo, and I have a guest down the road in Bermondsey. Next time we'll meet in person, but we're kind of half virtual, half in the real world. I'm joined here by a fantastic colleague from the built environment with a very interesting history, which I'm sure she'll explain better than me. But it involves working in architecture, finding out what they're passionate about, and pursuing that career. So still in the built environment, but doing something different. So I have the fantastic guest, Tanisha Raffiuddin. How are you today?
I'm really great, Stephen. Thank you. All the better for chatting with you this afternoon.
Wow, there you go. So we met last year in the midst of furlough when I set up the Architecture Social, and you were one of the first founding members. I think you were like number 28. It's pretty cool because now there's over 4,000. But we had an interesting chat because you have a very interesting experience, you have a very interesting career in architecture. For the benefit of anyone that hasn't met you already, Tanisha, can you tell us a bit about your career and yourself?
Thanks, Stephen. Interesting is the right word. Interesting career in architecture. That is one way of putting it. I've now come to learn that I can call it a squiggly career. And for those of you who are not familiar with what a squiggly career is, I would urge you to look them up. So exactly like Stephen said, I've had an interesting career. I studied architecture. I did a bachelor's degree in architecture. And then I was interested in sustainability. So I pursued a master's in sustainability at Nottingham University. And just as luck would have it, I graduated in the last recession. So what people now call the Great Recession of 2008, 2009.
Same here. Awful, wasn't it?
Yeah, awful. And and the other thing to point out is that I was a foreign student at the time. So I was not only competing in the open market, against other more local students, and this is also pre-Brexit, so European candidates as well. And it was a very, very, very dark place to be fighting for very, very limited jobs and being on the back foot as a foreign candidate. And like I said, it wasn't a very fun place to be, and I think it's probably similar to where a lot of younger students in architecture are finding themselves now. In the pandemic. So I had to pivot very, very quickly. And then the way I did it was I found this internship at the Architects Journal, purely on Twitter. One day I was scrolling on Twitter and I found the internship, a call out for an internship, and they were looking for someone to write about sustainability. They had launched a new sustainability blog, and I was like, this is absolutely down my street. I've just done my master's. I'm fresh. I can totally do this. And I answered the call. I had an interview with the editor, and I began to work with her. And that editor is Hattie Hartman, and she's still sustainability editor at the Architects Journal, and she's phenomenal. Follow her work as well. And that led me down to the path that I am where I am right now. So if I look back now, that's 11 years ago. Everything stems from that internship that I took at the Architects Journal, because through that internship, then I learned about writing, marketing, communicating, and publishing, and how magazines are compiled, how to create content, and how to create good content, high quality content. And the AJ is one of the most respected journals in the UK and probably around the world as well. So it was a really good place for me to be at the start of my career, because I was meeting architects at all levels, and they were just, because they were interested in talking to you because you were at the AJ. So I built a very strong network, and through that network then I found my next gig, which was at the Sustainable Development Foundation, and they were looking for somebody to run their marketing and communications as well. So there's more writing, more communicating, and this time more specifically about sustainability in the built environment. And one of the programs that I started working with is the Passivhaus Trust. And it
Right.
had just started then, and I helped launch it and promote it, and I grew all their social channels. They were not on social media. And I was like, guys, you need to be on social media. I was like, we don't know anything about it. It's like, if you care about it, you do it. You know?
Come on.
Like, okay, let's
There's
go.
a world out there.
And yeah, so that was my foray into social media. So social media has helped me a lot along the way, and then learning the tools. It was very new back then, learning how to be active on social media as a company and stuff like that. All very useful skills that I apply now professionally, and people actually paying me to do it. You know?
Well, it takes a lot of time, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And seeing the evolution of it as well over the years. And then I think it was 5 years into that journey, and then I always had this nagging feeling like I studied architecture, and there was always this guilt but I studied architecture, I did a master's, I spent all that time, getting this degree, and then, I've not been able to use it. That's how I felt. And so that kind of prompted me to figure out how to get back into practice. And fortunately, at that time, the market was turning again. People were hiring again. And through the Passivhaus network, one of the architects within that network, said, why don't you come and work with us? So that's how I got my foot in the door into traditional practice. And then I worked at another smaller company, and I purely took on that job just to do CAD stuff. Like, it was very basic. Like, I took a pay cut to go down and do this role purely just to learn how to draw again and do AutoCAD and all that sorts of things. And then I found myself into the last practice before I changed careers again. And they weren't so bothered about your CAD skills. They were like, you can train anybody, and they were using ArchiCAD, and not many studios use ArchiCAD. So they were like, yeah, you can come along. We'll train you up anyway. And that was, I guess, my closest real experience to being a part of a medium to large practice, working on live jobs, from all rigorous stages, from zero right up to tender, construction, and going on site. So in that 3 or 4 years of time that I was with them, I learned a lot about the whole spectrum of actually being an architect. And after that journey, so let's say, I guess I could allay my guilt and say, okay, I've done this now, but do I really enjoy it? And the answer was no.
Right.
And
important question.
Yeah, do I really enjoy it? And the answer was no. And I think the reason why I found that the answer was no for me was because I had worked outside of practice before. Yeah. And then life in practice wasn't all that it was cut out to be. I mean, it is improving. I'm hearing that it's improving, but definitely the work culture, the long hours, everything that we know about, the lousy pay, they were all factors that pushed me away from practice to the point was like, I'm burnt out. I can't do this anymore. I took time off. I took 6 months off. I went traveling around the world. I did a whole round the world trip by myself to clear my head. And then I came back with immense clarity. And I was like, you know what, my perfect job doesn't exist where I can combine, architecture and communications together. So I'm just going to have to create it myself. And I went back to a lot of my mentors and my first bosses. And then I was like, look, you've worked with me. Tell me, what am I good at? Like, what should I do? And a lot of them encouraged me and said, you're ready to start on your own. Just start a company, go on Companies House, register the company and just take it from there. And that was literally what I did. And I had a fantastic friend, somebody who I met in Melbourne on my travels, and then she had moved to London and she was looking for work, and she's also a content creator, and she was up for helping me out. And so together we came up with the name and the branding and built a very basic website, thought about what services we could offer. and it's just taken off from there.
Good for you. So, and that company that you're talking about now, are we talking about? We're talking about concept culture.
Yes,
correct?
yes, that is exactly. That is how.
Very cool.
That is the story of concept culture. That's it. It's purely was my desire to create this job for me where I could still stay within the built environment, stay within architecture, tell the stories about architecture, but not actually having to do tender drawings and construction packages.
I get it. I mean, I really get it. And that's why I think when we spoke last year, I really resonated. There's kind of two parts to that. One was because in my background, I went into architecture practice, and equally, I found no labor or love, like some of my colleagues did, about technical detailing. It just didn't do it for me. I just didn't have the same drive. Yet I didn't feel like I'm a non-driven person. I didn't feel lazy. However, it just didn't excite me. And I kind of fell into sales because I'm good at speaking with people. And I was like, what do I do after architecture? Now I quite enjoy it. But I remember that moment of actually speaking to my parents. They're both quite supportive. My mum was a bit like, really? You're going to give up architecture? You're going to go into sales? I don't understand it. But my father actually, he was really supportive of the idea because years ago, he was an engineer and he used to work in a factory many, many years ago. And he hated the job. And he was like, son, I remember I hated that job. And having the strength to move away from it, he then went into a job he loved. And then he was much, much more successful than staying on the tool machine. And so that's where I really resonate with it. The other bit what was interesting last year is that when I set up the Architecture Social, I was quite a few students and being very specific to you do content creation, you're talking about writing, working with the journal, the AJ, the Architecture Journal. And I think some people have that passion in architecture because architecture is quite wide. When you're studying it, I personally didn't enjoy writing the essays or dissertations. It wasn't what I enjoyed, but some people love it, right? And it makes a lot of sense that people who really got into that have a passion for journalism. There's a job in architecture. But I think it's fair to say that not many people know how to do that transition. And it's really not clear, is it? Because if you're deviating away, Tanisha, from the part 1, part 2, part 3, there is no roadmap really on how to go about that. You kind of have to learn it yourself. Is that how you felt when you did it?
Oh, 100%. Yes, that is so true. And and the other thing is, I think a lot of it is down to, you mentioned the word strength, and I think strength is a very important quality to have when you're transitioning from a subject like that you studied architecture. It's an actual thing. It's a formal degree. And then, branching into journalism, which is also a formal subject. And, people study journalism, and a lot of my colleagues at the AJ had more journalistic and literature backgrounds. But the AJ also had writers and contributors who had architecture backgrounds as well. So I took some comfort in that I didn't feel like a fraud in this space because I hadn't done a journalism degree, whereas some others had. But what that makes you do is that work really hard, and then you have to learn everything almost as you go. And a lot of this is learning by doing. So writing is no exception. So the more you write, the better you get at it. The more content you create, the better you get at it. So practice. But having said that, writing is a skill. And some are born with it and some are not. So I'm not here saying that, just if you start writing, you'll get better. There is an inherent skill. And some will be better writers than others. But if you feel like you have that skill, or someone has told you, you're a good writer, or one of your uni tutors or somebody, or one of your friends say you're really good at writing. And that's what happened a lot to me, and I didn't realize it, that people were telling me that you're really good at writing. And then if you enhance that skill and practice, then you will be able to elevate yourself.
Interesting. Very interesting. So in part of my job now is that I have to write a lot of stuff, but it's very different writing for the architecture journal than a job description, because a job description is what it's taken me years to master, and it's a very different art form. But it has a lot closer to do with social media, as in over time you learn how to grab people's attention, how to draw them into an idea. You have to keep it short enough, and this is job descriptions, that it's to the point, but you need to make it relatable, because I think online, and you tell me this because you're the professional, this is what you do, but my understanding is everyone's busy, right? So much information out there. And the art form is really how do you reach out and make it relatable so that someone clicks on your art piece in a noisy world. So on that point, just before we move on to it, I would love to know what you think of the stuff I do in the Architecture Social. Have I got something or have I not got something? And you can tell me the truth.
Oh my God, you put me on the spot here, Stephen. Well,
I could probably do a proper copywriter and journalist, but how am I
think that's what I was going to say, like, as you were talking. So there's a difference as well within writing. So there's writing that's editorial and there's writing that's copywriting. Okay. So a lot of what we do at Concept Culture is copywriting. And the difference between writing editorial and copywriting is, even when you're writing copy, that is the exact, when you hear people writing, oh, this copy is here, the copy is there. Those are words that are predominantly used to sell and to attract attention.
That's what I do, copywriting then.
Exactly. Yeah. So when you see, there's a job that's a copywriter job, that is essentially somebody who writes words to sell a product or a service or whatever it may be. And there's a psychological element to it. So they are writing to convince the reader or to persuade the reader to buy the product, click on the link, follow us on Instagram or whatever it is. Whereas more of what the AJ does is editorial. And that's opinion pieces, thought leadership.
And that's where that's not my strength, right? Yeah, that's exactly. A totally different gig. Yes. To get the narrative, to keep going, the reader journey.
Fact checking, interviews. Yes. So that's a more technical aspect to writing. And I think I depending on where your skill set lies, if you're more investigative journalist sort of thing, then you probably enjoy the editorial side of things.
Yes.
But if you enjoy being on social media and creating content for social media, then you're more of a copywriter.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And I'm deviating slightly, but you enjoy this. So one of the tools that I actually use at the moment on the Architecture Social, and I've paid a lot of money to use it every month. Some months I use it a lot, and some months I don't. But I actually use a copywriting tool called Jarvis, which is an artificial intelligence tool. You're laughing because you know exactly what I'm on about. I use it all the time. It's because sometimes I find it really good, especially when I've got writer's block. Writer's block? What am I on about?
Writer's block.
Writer's block, exactly. And it can be really, really helpful. And I find that sometimes it can be super great, and the other times it goes off on a tangent. So I still think it's a great time saver, but it's a tool, isn't it? And I'm not going to say it's going to replace people, because I really don't see that happening. It's a bit like when people go, LinkedIn's going to replace recruitment. And it's like, well, not really. It's a tool. But what's your experience of all these quirky tools, Tanisha, then?
I personally haven't used Jarvis. I don't need to.
Yeah.
But I have heard of it.
You can have a go on my one at some point.
Okay. Yeah. But I do know that, the smaller businesses, they do use it a lot. I know people who use it.
Yeah.
And there are these copywriter tools that help you create content quickly. And I think they're useful then from a time-saving perspective, because it's not easy to create content on a regular basis. I mean, you do it on Architecture Social. I do it professionally. And, inspiration doesn't hit you every day. So sometimes, and exactly for the days when you have writer's block and creative block, it is useful to have a tool or some other source of inspiration. Definitely use it to help you for sure, but it is not a shortcut for hiring somebody. I think you would get more value by hiring the right copywriter.
Correct. Yeah. It struggles with the narrative and you need to really fact check it. But where it can be good is just how to phrase words and stuff. So it's a really good tool for me. Sometimes I'm like, how to get that sentence out. You're like, oh, that's good. And the other thing I found that was good was with SEO. And that actually brings me on to like another part of the chat, because there's so many facets in your job. And like, I'm just inserting my opinion here now, but with the Architecture Social, and I'm sure you have a lot of clients as well who are, maybe small at the moment, but building themselves up. It's actually a full-time job, as well. That's what your job is: doing the social media, getting the message out there, and coordinating all this stuff. So I try really hard to make sure that I use certain tools, because otherwise I get sucked into the rabbit hole and my time gets lost. So I tell you my tools of the trade, and you can review me. So I use the Jarvis, but it's expensive, and I'm thinking, oh, do I need that now? The other thing I use, which I think is a lot easier, is Buffer. So I get one piece of content and I put it all out on the social media channels, because my view is that, yes, I want to engage, but social media is really about building an audience. And I think that's slightly different than the Architecture Social Forum, because I see the Architecture Social Forum as a place where people can talk, and that's a community. Now, the advantage I got is that it's a channel built up, but the other tools are more on how you manage the social media, because you can get sucked into Facebook, you can get sucked into Instagram, you can get sucked into Twitter. They're all very different, but I use that tool to manage all that. I also use Grammarly because I'm not, I need it. And what else do I do? I'll have a quick look on my Google. I use Bitly, but that's just to shorten the links, because, every character's. And I use a tool called Keyword Surfer for SEO. And that just tells you if I'm saying the right things when I'm building the architecturesocial.com. But that's it. How do I survive the crit? Am I doing all right?
That's very impressive. That's very, very impressive. It sounds like you're very organized and you're on it. And
I don't know about that.
I do not. I mean, if you're a small business or a small practice, or even you're growing your personal brand, I would absolutely advise using a content scheduling tool like Buffer.
Yes.
Or Planoly or Hootsuite. There are many on the market. You have to test them all to see what works best for you and what works within your budget, because some of them are paid tools, and that's the key step to any sort of content creation and content, and that sits under the wider content marketing, which is a part of your wider marketing strategy, is about being organized. Having a content calendar and having content pillars and themes, everything that aligns with your message. And then, if you're like yourself, like you have events or you're running a podcast, then, you will plan content around promoting the podcast before it's released and then promoting it after it's released. That calendar will help you stay organized, and tools like Buffer or Hootsuite will help you stay organized. And you mentioned Bitly. Bitly is not new, but it's very, very helpful to shorten the URLs for Twitter. And also that helps you track traffic as well, because it measures the traffic sources. And then SEO, yes, Keyword Surfer. There's also Hotjar, and then HubSpot. There are a lot of these, SEMrush. There are a lot of these companies that have free tools. There's an element of free tool as well that you can, key in your website, and it will tell you how healthy your website is. I mean, SEO is a whole podcast in itself.
It's so deep, isn't it? And we'll have another one on it. But I think I joke that sometimes, and you get it, because a lot of what I do is a website, and it's so important to learn, because it is the difference between being seen or not. But you are right. There are so many levels. The algorithm is constantly changing. There are principles there which work. But you're right. I tell you what, though. My goal is, once I get my business making enough turnover, I plan to move away from doing the social media, because it's very exhaustive doing everything. And I imagine part of your role and part of your business is to take that. So at some point you'd be like, Steve, hand over the Buffer. Let's go. Hand over Is that what your role is when you go and meet companies then? Do you try and like say, look, I will take care of this part of it and we will work out your journey, we will work out your meaning? I would love to know a bit about, a little bit about concept culture.
That's absolutely it. That's half of my sales pitch there, Stephen. Thank you.
Yeah. Take it away. I'll be like, here's the accounts, go, please.
Well, I mean, essentially, a lot of the times, a lot of the work that we have is through the network that I have. But there's very often a client will come to us from Google. They have found us on Google, and that's always a win because, and this is one thing I advise clients and like, make your website work for you. Your website can bring you leads even when you're sleeping. That is the job of the SEO. Every other time I will get somebody who books a call directly from the website. We have a link to book a call with us, a consultation call, free consultation call, and I'll get somebody and that they found us. And the first question I ask, how do you find us? And it'll be from Google. So that's how I know that our SEO strategy is working.
Yes.
So essentially, what I like, for example, a company would come to me and they would they would have a problem. At that point, if they've come, they booked the call, they have identified that they have a problem. So let's say that let's create a hypothetical scenario. They're 10 years in the game. Okay, they're a practice that they're 10 years in the game. And, predominantly the work has only been word of mouth, and they now want to branch in and work in a different sector or attract a different audience, and they want to grow. They want to celebrate their success that they've been around for 10 years. 10 years is no joke, for being in practice. It's quite a long journey. And they say, well, we don't know the first thing about creating an online presence. How can you help us? And at that point, that's when I would ask them, so what have you done in the past? Do you have a brand story? Tell me about your brand. And I have a little questionnaire that I take them through. And I ask a lot of questions and diagnose where they sit. Like, are they comfortable with their brand story? Are they comfortable about the messages that they're saying? Are they sure that these are the messages? Do they have clarity of what we stand for as a practice? Does everybody in the team know what we stand for as a practice? And then, depending on where they are in that journey, then I will craft a bespoke plan for them. So I was like, okay, let's take you through the branding exercise first. Let's build this brand strategy for you. Let's carve out the messages first. Understand who you are, why you exist, and how you help your audience. And then we go on to tactics, which is then where digital marketing, we'll talk about digital marketing, and that will depend on the resources available to them, if they have in-house support, or then whether they want us to create the content as well. And then we'll create a bespoke plan, what this content plan looks like. So depending on how many channels they want to be active on, and if they want a blog, because a blog is the best way to boost your SEO, I would say it's
100%.
To boost your SEO. So if there's anyone who tells you blogging is dead, that is not true.
That's so rubbish, isn't it? It's and just to add to that, I completely agree. But then I think in that scenario, it's about challenging what people think a blog is, because it's not about just taking like an Instagram picture or whatever. A blog can be your thought piece of substance, but in my definition, and you can substantiate this as the expert, but actually all those keywords, all those things that you talk about, if you have a cohesive narrative piece on the blog that people read for a certain amount of period of time, Google then starts realizing that people are spending good time on that content. So then it starts to kind of see you, identify you as an expert in a niche. And that's powerful because that's when the rankings start going up. Is that accurate loosely?
100%. And also it takes place over time.
Yes.
So that's the other thing to note. Like, even if you bring in an SEO expert to help you out, you need to give them time. So it'll be at least 3-4 months before you will start ranking for the terms that you want to rank on.
Yeah.
And then 6 months, and then 1 year down the line, you will see better results. And I think the reason why I totally 100% emphasize on writing blogs or writing newsletters to direct people to to the blogs is because Google ranks keywords based on articles, or like, a homepage will rarely rank number one. So it's what is the value of that content. So if you're writing blogs regularly and good quality blogs, and then you're writing newsletters to promote those blogs, or you're or you're active on social media and you're constantly driving people to read those blogs, then Google starts realizing, oh, these guys are doing good quality content, and we need to promote this. So all their webs, all those keywords are, building this. It's literally building a web of signals to tell Google, like, okay, these guys are creating good content. We need to rank them higher.
Yeah, I think it's so fascinating, and just for anyone, because we're covering a lot of ground here. So whether even you're a student or a business professional, right? I think, and I've got a comment from my own experience, but even when I was the only part when I had a website at the time, and you had some people had Wix, but I actually learned WordPress, and WordPress can be as simple or as complicated as you make it, because it can get very interesting in the back end, and a lot of the architecture social is actually built on WordPress. But it was through learning the website when I was in part one that got me to where I am now, or that kind of passion or that interest in web design has become such a valuable skill that it really, really, really helps. And I would say even in recruitment, they always put me in a massive unfair advantage, because when you start talking about SEO, and whenever you're doing your own business, or even about how you build an online persona or professional like CV portfolio, a website can be useful. Now, I always think that, say now if someone's listening student, yes, you want to make the CV and portfolio the most important document. However, and this is the bit which I think the website is not a replacement for that, but what it can be is like a really nice complementary piece, and it can be beautiful. And imagine if you start working on your website when you're a student, and it could be like, I own StephenDrew.com, and that was lucky because I bought it at a time just before a baseball Stephen Drew guy went rocketed up. And see, so it's good to get that domain. What I'm saying though is, learning those skills as a student, the SEO started ranking for that, and I started learning all these lessons. So it's really, really valuable to get into, even if you still plan to do an architecture, or if you're a journalist or whatever. I think it's so, so good to learn. And you can just use WordPress. Or, I mean, like now there's like Webflow, which looks really, really interesting. I would probably, if I was a student, I would probably be looking at Webflow. I can't really do what I want in the architecture social in it because it has like 60,000 pages, which is a bit insane. But that's what I would be looking at. Do you think building websites is a good skill for everyone?
Well, definitely, if that's what you want to do, I think. But understanding the basics of what goes into the making of a website is also good enough. Unless you want to transition into becoming a UX, that's user experience, or a UI, that's user interface designer, then you'll have to really learn the languages, that's HTML, Java, and the like. And I don't. That's why I hire developers. So we have a team of developers, and we use Webflow a lot, actually. So I'm glad you mentioned it. We're advocating for it, and we recently built a client's website on Webflow, and starting a new project this week, actually, which is also going to be in Webflow. And the reason we advocated is purely for the benefit of the client, because then you can edit it easily in-house.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that it takes that sting out of editing it, whereas WordPress, depending on how complex the website is, you will need some basic understanding of HTML.
Yes. Yeah, you do. I do CSS, and I've done bits and bobs, and it's also with WordPress, you are on the strength of the theme. Yes. So a theme is something you install into WordPress. Whereas what I like about Webflow, and to me, it kind of makes sense architecturally. Like if you've used Adobe and all this stuff, which probably most of the listeners you have, then Webflow, yes, is a learning curve, but it kind of makes sense,
Yep, and I think because Webflow is an offshoot of the no-code movement. So
yes,
so all these developers who have moved on to virtually, like if you don't have any coding experience, you could just learn how to use Webflow and exactly how you say. So you can build prototypes in a tool called Figma or Adobe XD, which is similar to InDesign.
Okay.
Creating layouts, and so that's the first step. That when you're doing web design, it will create that visual prototype in either Figma or Adobe XD, depending on the developer's preference, and clients can then review designs as in how they're being built, and they can comment, on those prototypes as to what they like or what they don't like, or move this content around and stuff like that. So it makes from the client review perspective as well, it makes life much easier. So it's not like going away and designing a website and then after a couple of weeks saying, oh, here, this is what your website looks like, and you've had no say in the journey. But here you can be as much or as little involved as you like in the process, and definitely a platform like Webflow, I think architects would love using it. So I'd agree with you on that, because there's no code involved. So I think if there's an architects who are considering moving into UX UI design, then Webflow will be a great platform.
Yeah, I agree. And just so you know, I say Wolf exclusive, that sounds bigger than this, but you heard it here first. That I'm actually building something in no code, which people can then use as a tool to navigate their job searches in. It's basically a database. I've got a lot of practices in there, and then people can log in. So say hypothetically you were looking for a job, so maybe in the past when you were a student. So you can keep track of stuff, log where you want. That's what I'm kind of building in no code. And it plugs into databases, it plugs into stuff that I can handle. And I really like that, because, look, there's always a place for a developer. But where I'm at right now in my business, I can't justify the cost of a developer, and it's not familiar territory for me. However, what's interesting about no code is that you can design principles and concepts, and then should that go somewhere, then I would imagine you could hand that to a developer. So to me, it seems like a really smart, logical way to go about things. I've seen Bubble, I've seen all this stuff, and it's really fascinating to me. What's your thoughts on the no-code stuff? Does it make sense what I said?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think a lot of, even when we're working with developers, because I think one thing to mention is that concept project is like we're a collective of creatives, and everyone is a freelancer or self-employed, and they have their own business. And I create a team based on what the project needs or what the client needs. And a lot of the times I will have somebody who's both a designer and a developer. And sometimes I will have someone who's only a web designer, and sometimes I will have someone who's only a web developer. Yeah. So in that case, so what you're describing is so you would do the design yourself, and then when you're happy with the design, and you need the developer to actually make it go live. If you're designing a website, you're designing an app, definitely for apps, you will need developers.
My gosh, apps. It's a deep end, isn't it? It's like, that's what's interesting about Bubble. I've been looking at Bubble.
Yeah.
But also right now I'm looking at a database called Stacker. Problem is no code. There's an element where you can't, like a bit like Webflow or anything. The architect in us, you want to design everything. But there is that trade-off between there's no code and there's something you can do, but there's not complete customability. But what I would love to know in terms of your experience, the bit that's daunting with me, and I'm sure, and this is where the skill of what your job is as well. Sometimes I get a little bit fazed by developers. So you mentioned you've built up this networking concept culture. Equally, I know, for instance, someone that's built a website similar to the Architecture Social. And instead of using a platform like Mighty Networks, which the forum's in, went to a developer, spent thousands of pounds in the technology. It's just WordPress, which has been around for a while. And I think there is a potential danger of you can invest in a developer and they can squander your money, or it doesn't work, or you need to constantly put the money into it. Is that a fair assumption I have, or is that not the case, that it can can go in the wrong direction with developers.
I think that is definitely, it definitely does happen, and there are bad developers out there, and there are a lot of times I hear people, and those who come to me as well, who have been bitten very badly, and then they just lose trust in the system, and then I have to work really hard to rebuild that trust, because unfortunately, like any industry, there are good apples and bad apples. So I think that's where then coming to concept culture will help you, because we take the sting out of that, because essentially my role as the creative director and project manager is to make sure that I'm the mediator between the client and the creative. And in the sense that I also do quality control, and to make sure that the creative, or in this case, the developer, is delivering to the client's brief. So that's another way companies can work with us. It's like if they're looking to build a website, or they're looking to commission photography or videography, and they have no idea how to write a creative brief, because it's all about that creative brief, because that is what stems from it. You take this brief to the creative, and then they will give you a quote or a price and a set of deliverables and outputs, and that's work in itself. And if you have no experience dealing with professional creatives, then you could get stung. That's to answer your question.
It really does, and it's quite interesting that even though what you do is a different sector to mine, and while you're part of architecture, but while you're not building buildings per se, what's interesting is that, as you said, briefing is so important, exactly like in the design process. And if that brief isn't quite right, unfortunately, it can be miscommunication, things can go off on a tangent, and that's where the cost is. And so I totally understand why, as you say, if you've got your network and then you get developers you trust, then you're going to keep a hold of them. But equally, especially when we're talking about collaboration around the world, that briefing needs to be so important. Otherwise, even with the best intentions, a developer could misunderstand what is happening and could go off in the wrong way. But that's also like architecture, where sometimes visualizations are outsourced. They come back wrong. And what's happened? There was a crappy brief from the architect. The colors were wrong, or the person makes assumptions, and that's because of communication. So, I find that interesting, that whole part of the process. Do you have any tips to mitigate that? Is it just building trust and building communication skills, or what would you suggest?
I think a lot of what you've talked about, and I think there's similarities from running jobs in architecture in the crudest way. When you run a job, you're the project manager as the architect, and you have all the various consultants that answer to you, and you create the project timeline, you create the Gantt chart, and you make sure that everyone's delivering on time. And that's exactly similar to what I'm doing now. But I'm not building a building, but I'm creating content, or creating a website, or creating a video, or creating a podcast. So the same rules apply. So regular communication, good brief up front, and regular communication, regular check-ins. So when we do websites, so we'll have fortnightly check-ins with our clients and say, this is where we are, comment now, or forever hold your peace kind of thing. Exactly. And also getting it right. There's a point where, even like in construction, everything has to be perfect from the drawing board, and then only it goes to site. The same logic applies in web design and development. So make sure that the web design is tight, and then the developer comes in and builds it and makes it functional, making working links and then making it live. So make sure that before that happens, that you're happy with the design. So constant communication, regular communication, and be clear on your aspirations, and make sure that the designer or the developer gets it. And the other way to go about it is, like, if you have some visions in your head, then you create a mood board for them, or ask them to do it for you, and that's where you have some ideas of what you want your website to look like. So
Very cool.
yeah, so start with the right brief, have a proper program in place, and regular communication.
Makes complete sense. I think in it is what it's these conversations so interesting that while you don't practice architecture, and I don't practice architecture per se, that whole approach that you kind of learn of how you look at things in the brief, I think it never goes away. And that's why sometimes when people talk to me about even, the fact that I don't practice architecture anymore, would I not do my part 1 or part 2 again if I could change things? And I'm like, no, I love it. There's so much value to it. The way I look at the architecture social, it's got that mindset that I always had. In particular, like Manchester School of Architecture, there was Nick Dunn and Richard Brook. I don't suppose you're listening, but shout out to those who were amazing and had that kind of inquisitive look and into things. Really, really helped me with the way I look at design. So actually, Tanisha, I like to mix things up here. I just find it quite rude not rude, but why is it always in the podcast that the host gets to ask the questions? So I was wondering if you have 1 or 2 questions for me that you would like to ask me, and you've had no preparation for this, but then you can ask me whatever is the first thing that comes to mind about anything.
Well, actually, I have listened to your previous podcast, so I know that you do this.
Oh, damn!
I do have
Uh-oh, I'm in trouble now. These are going to be seriously loaded.
I guess, and I think this is a very broad question, but on the one hand, I'd love to know what's next for the architecture social. What are your plans like? And I know you're passionate about it. You want to grow it.
Yeah.
And I think my other question is like, now that you're on the Viva Council,
yes,
what do you plan to do with your time there?
Good questions, both of them. So let me tackle number 1 first and tackle number 2 second.
Okay.
So we met at the Architecture Social. That was when I was on furlough. And the core of it, what's been interesting is that while I'm happy for people to use the space in whatever which way, there seems to be a common theme, which people go to the Architecture Social and it's useful. And I guess it's to do with my strength, which is employability, right? Or learning how to get a job, reviewing CVs. There's a little bit of fun and banter there, and that's amazing. But that's its common thread. That's its common theme. So when I started, it was CV portfolios. And I guess the next evolution of it, the way I see it, is that I've been spending a lot of time on the .com. And that's paid off because the forum, there's less people using it. And that's fine. But we all got busy lives. And I think we're all been on forums. We're all a bit fed up of lockdown. But luckily, all that time spent in SEO and stuff, the traffic of the .com is a lot. And well, it feels a lot to me. So you could tell me this. So I think I get about, organic traffic is about 60%, which is quite big. And it gets about 400 people a day. And the 200 of them are organically. So I'm quite pleased with that, considering that the website's been going a year and I haven't spent £1 to set the time on marketing. But as we know, my time and your time is worth a lot. So it's probably thousands of pounds if you look at it that way. But that's a nice part of it. Where's it going now? The truth is, it needs to bring in a revenue, okay, to be self-sufficient. We run businesses, you know what it's like. And luckily, I know recruitment from before. So there will be a level of doing ethical recruitment. But I think that fits in with the theme of employability. But then that also fits in with the theme of keep bringing in a revenue, which will keep it self-sufficient. And if that's the governing factor, as in I am not at beckon to certain sponsors, then there's a certain liberal theme I have of it that I can hopefully keep the name and the fee, the feel of the Architecture Social in the kind of spirit it started. Having said that, I'm not against Autodesk sponsoring the Architecture Social or anything like that. I would be more than happy to speak to you or to Desk, and I would be more interested to hear from anyone in the marketing world. But that's where my mind is at, and I think to the goal of why, I think that if people still find value in it and get jobs from it in their own search or through recruitment or whatever, then I think it has a value and a place. And if people can learn, that's the goal. So that's where I'm at right now, bringing the revenue in. That's the specific answer.
Well, does anyone know anyone in Autodesk? I think Autodesk should jump on this opportunity.
Yeah, come on, talk to me, right? Well, I need to go out there and reach out to them as well. And as we know, finding the time to build a company and promote a company it's hard. But we'll get there. Second question you had, Reba Council. That is a good example of creating the Architecture Social brought on new opportunities. And through the connections that I made, meeting people like yourself from Clubhouse, and like, for instance, Jason, one of the people that put me forward for it, there was an opportunity. And maybe in the past, I wouldn't have gone for it. But actually, I'm a part 2. I don't plan to get my part 3. And I thought, you know what? I'll put my hat in the ring for this position, because it's very interesting to know, like, if people who stay as a part 2, kindred spirits, like, I say us loosely, because whether you're a part 1 or part 2, whatever, or you move away from architecture, it's quite an interesting role there, and to be part of Reba. And also, the other bit I thought would be good about tackling the position of being the representatives of part 2 is that you're at that nice point of getting the part 3 or doing other stuff in the industry. And I feel like I'm at a point of authority where I've helped a lot of people transition into architecture. And as you know, people like ourselves, it's okay not to do architecture. So I think, hey, I'll run for the seat. But Reba is very different than what I'm used to. And it's been a bit of a learning curve. And what I would say is that, and this is that there's so many different people in Reba that you're right, you really do have to pick your values and where you can really make a difference. Because if you try to tackle everything, you just wouldn't have any time. Bear in mind, you do this as well as your full-time job. So I think where I'm focusing on Reba, so I'm part of the Reba Future Architects group, which is where the students are involved. And the other bit is that there is a Reba hub that Alan Jones was talking about, and that's like a community forum. So hopefully I can weigh in some of the lessons I learned in the Architecture Social to make that a little bit more interesting, because it's a very different beast, me running my forum, to having the Reba body and you have different people in the country and different representations. It's a whole different gig. So I think I'll focus on the education, I'll focus on the hub, and the other bit, which I haven't let go, and which I said I would follow, and I am, is that all the stuff with unpaid overtime, salaries in architecture is something that I was conscious of bringing up, and it's something that I'm following in the Reba Council meetings. The reality is, though, it's something that we constantly need to talk about. It's not a case of like you can flick a switch and it's done, but at the same time, that's the goal. So fingers crossed, this end of this year, I've done something that comes out with it, and if not, I'll tell you why. But you kind of got to jump into these things, and you never know which way they're going to go. But I figure you've got to get involved. And I'll be the first to say, when I was a student, I didn't know what Reba did for me, and I didn't have a favourable opinion of that. Now I'm getting involved a bit. You kind of see the other side of the coin, and you see all the hard work there. At the same time, though, there's still a lot to go. So yeah, I'm in the pits with it, and we just see where it takes. But how did I do? Did I answer those two openly and fairly as possible, or do you want me?
Yeah, I mean, you're not a politician yet, so you did answer the question directly.
Yeah, I did answer the question. You
didn't give a politician's answer, which is great.
No,
so like you have an agenda, and all the best to you. And the Reba Council is definitely will benefit from you and your knowledge of how to create a community from scratch, how to engage with the younger generation, all the content that you're producing, and putting your own time and sweat into it. Like you said, like we both know how energy intensive and time consuming creating content is, and creating content that's of value is even more energy intensive. So I hope they listen to you and take your ideas on board.
Wow. That's very sweet of you to say. And you're right. I always try to answer the question. That was the way to answer. The short answer is make the architecture social, make a profit. And then Reba, we'll have to see, because I'm just in it for the wild ride. We just don't know. But I'm in there, and I'll let everyone know what's going on.
Yeah.
But enough about me, even though I enjoyed that. We are going to round up the show. Before we do that, you have to stay on the line.
Okay.
But before we log off together, tell everyone where they can find you, and tell everyone where they can find your business.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Stephen, for this conversation. And I know it's been almost a year in the making, but I think it's better that we had it a year later, because now that you've grown and you have much more to talk about and share as well, and you're creating better content for your audience now that you know who they are and what they want. So I think it's worked out. As for me, yes, you can find Concept Culture online at www.conceptculture.co. That's .co. It's not .com or .co.uk. Those domains were too expensive.
Absolutely. What a
so
racket.
It is .co. It's happened so many times. Like people will write emails and they'll put a .com and .co.uk and say we can't reach you. I was like, yes, because it's .com.
Do you know what, Tanisha? Though, one thing you're going to be very jealous, because I somehow flukily got the architecture social for £10, whereas arcsocial.com is £2,000.
Whoa!
I got lucky, huh? You know how hard it is. Yeah.
So that's where you can find us, and we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, and we're on LinkedIn. We're not as active as we can be, because most of the time we're creating content for clients. But do give us a follow. Every now and then we do post content that's related to branding and marketing your work, be it from a personal brand level to a practice and even place branding, how to tell the story about your project.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tanisha. Stay on the line,
Okay.
because this podcast is going to upload. But thank you to everyone in the audience. I'm going to end this now. And if you want to get in touch with Tanisha, you know how to do it. And see you on the next episode.